Don't talk to my son. I don't want him picking up anything from your kind." That's what the white billionaire growled at the black waitress, loud enough for every customer to hear. But it wasn't the deaf boy who couldn't hear. It was his father, deaf to decency, blind to respect. The waitress didn't shout back. She simply walked over and looked the boy in the eyes. And somehow, he heard her perfectly. It wasn't the kind of place you just walked into. Reservations were booked 3 weeks in advance. The chandeliers weren't just lights, they were imported crystal. The menus didn't list prices, because if you had to ask, you didn't belong there. Amara knew that. She'd worked there for 8 months. The only black waitress on staff, she moved like clockwork. Polite, efficient, invisible when needed. She smiled even when customers didn't. She took pride in her work. But that night was different. Because that was the night he walked in. Isaac Thornhill, billionaire investor, media mogul, and, as some whispered, a man who treated staff like shadows. He entered with his entourage, trailed by bodyguards and stares. At his side was a boy, maybe 9 or 10, light curls, pressed white shirt, quiet eyes that didn't match his father's arrogance. Amara noticed right away how stiff the boy seemed, how he flinched every time Isaac barked an order at the staff. She didn't see a spoiled air. She saw a child shrinking into silence. She approached with a warm smile. "Good evening, sir. May I take your order?" The boy looked up at her. Finally, someone who spoke to him, not about him. But before he could respond, Isaac snapped, "Don't talk to him." Amara blinked. "I'm sorry?" "He doesn't need your attention," Isaac continued, swirling his wine. "He's just here to watch. And frankly," he gave her a tight, dismissive smile, "he doesn't relate to your kind." The room didn't go silent, but it got colder. Amara's chest tightened. Not because she hadn't heard racism before. She had. But because it was said so casually, so publicly, like it was nothing. She forced herself to stay composed. "I was only offering him the menu." "I said," Isaac repeated, sharper this time, "he's not interested in what you're offering." Amara stepped back. Her hands trembled, but not from fear. From restraint. She met the boy's eyes once more. He hadn't looked away. In fact, he was trying to say something. His lips moved, slowly, deliberately. "I'm sorry," he mouthed. And in that moment, Amara saw the truth. The boy wasn't like his father. He was afraid of him. Before she could respond, Isaac raised his voice again, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Is there someone else available? Preferably someone who doesn't make this uncomfortable for everyone?" Amara took a breath. She could walk away. She'd done it before. But the boy looked at her again. Eyes pleading, silently screaming for something he couldn't voice. And that's when she decided. She wasn't going to be invisible tonight. Amara didn't leave. Her hands were still trembling, but her feet were firm. She had spent a lifetime being told to let it go, to stay silent, to not cause a scene. But silence had never saved her. It only protected the people who humiliated her. So she stood her ground. With a practiced calm, she addressed Isaac again. "Of course, sir. I'll fetch your server." But she didn't move immediately. Instead, she bent slightly and placed a small children's menu in front of the boy. Her fingers brushed the corner of his placemat gently. An unspoken message. "I see you," Isaac scoffed loudly. "Did you not hear me, or do you people just have selective comprehension?" The way he said, "you people," sharp, surgical, wasn't lost on anyone. A few nearby diners looked over now, uncomfortable but saying nothing. No one ever challenged men like Isaac Thornhill. They were rich, loud, untouchable, but the boy wasn't like him. He kept glancing at Amara, not out of curiosity but with a quiet urgency. His lips moved again, slowly, carefully. Amara focused. "Thank you," he mouthed. It hit her like a wave. Gratitude. From someone so small, so voiceless in that towering world of wealth and ego, Isaac didn't notice, or maybe he didn't care. "Whatever," he muttered. "Just bring the steak, medium rare. For me. He doesn't eat red meat, makes him too soft." Amara nodded once, turned, and walked toward the kitchen. But in her chest, something had shifted. This wasn't just about her. It wasn't just about racism. It was about the boy, muted by fear, trapped in privilege, being raised by a man who thought emotions were weakness and kindness was beneath his bloodline. Inside the kitchen, her coworker Louise noticed her clenched jaw. "Everything okay?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "No, but I know what I'm doing." She returned to the table with the order in silence. But this time she placed a folded napkin beside the boy. Hidden inside was a small note she wrote in seconds. "You don't need to be like him. It's okay to feel. It's okay to speak." The boy read it under the table. His eyes welled up, but he blinked quickly, scared his father might see. Isaac was busy complaining about the wine temperature. "It's always the same with these people," he said to his assistant. "You give them a uniform and suddenly they think they're part of the story." Amara heard it. Everyone did. Still, she said nothing. But the boy? He did something unexpected. He reached out, slowly, and placed his small hand on Amara's. It was just for a second. But in that moment, a bond formed. Not of pity, not of rebellion, but of shared understanding, the kind that people like Isaac never felt because they never listened. And suddenly, the room felt warmer. Not because Isaac Thornhill approved, but because, for the first time, someone dared to care. Something had changed. The boy's tiny gesture, his hand resting briefly on Amara's, didn't go unnoticed. Not entirely. A woman, seated 2 tables over, leaned toward her husband, whispering, "Did you see that?" He gave a slight nod but kept his eyes on his plate. Like most people there, he knew who Isaac Thornhill was, and how dangerous it could be to stand in his way. Amara returned to the kitchen again, not because she needed to, but because she needed to breathe. Her chest felt tight. Her heart raced. She'd served CEOs, actors, politicians, but never had she felt the room hold its breath like this. Luis approached her again. "You good?" Amara met his eyes. "I don't know. That boy, he's not like his father." Luis shook his head. "Most kids aren't. But if you speak up, you know what management's gonna say. He's a top client." Amara didn't respond. She didn't need to. She'd heard it all before. Back at the table, Isaac was droning on about one of his companies. His assistant nodded along robotically, typing something on her tablet. The boy sat silent, staring at his water glass, but when Amara returned, his eyes lifted instantly, like she brought light with her. She set down a fresh napkin beside his plate and gently whispered, "You okay?" But before he could nod, Isaac interrupted. "I thought I made myself clear." Amara straightened. Her voice was firm but calm. "You did, sir. I just wanted to make sure your son was comfortable." Isaac leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Tell me, what's your name again?" "Amara." "Amara," he repeated like it was something sour. "Do you know why people like you serve people like me?" A hush fell over the nearby tables. "It's because you're replaceable," he said. "Your job is to blend in, be useful, and not pretend like you matter." The boy flinched. Amara saw it. "I don't need a social worker, Amara. I need a steak and silence." The rage rose in her throat, but again she held it. "I understand," she replied evenly, "but sometimes silence is the problem, not the solution." That's when someone in the restaurant clapped. Just once. It was quiet, almost a mistake, but then someone else joined. Then a third. Isaac turned sharply, scanning the room. "Is this a joke?" A man at a nearby table spoke up. "No, Mr. Thornhill. But mocking your own son and demeaning a woman doing her job isn't something we came here to watch." Isaac's face flushed red. The boy, emboldened by the moment, slowly pushed his chair back and stood up. He walked to Amara's side, quietly, bravely. Isaac hissed, "Sit down." But the boy didn't. Instead, he looked up at Amara, then turned to the diners and said something barely louder than a whisper. "She's the only one here who talks to me like I'm human." And just like that, the power in the room shifted, not because Isaac Thornhill allowed it, but because a boy finally found his voice and used it. Silence used to protect Isaac Thornhill. It kept his reputation clean, his critics afraid, and his empire untouched. But tonight, silence betrayed him, because now his own son had shattered it, not with a scream, not with a rebellion, but with a simple, human truth. "She's the only one here who talks to me like I'm human." Those words hung in the air like thunder. No music played, no forks clinked, just a hollow quiet that made Isaac's arrogance sound even louder in contrast. Amara didn't move. She stood frozen beside the boy, heart racing. Not with fear, with something far more dangerous to a man like Isaac, dignity. The boy, still standing, looked at his father, not defiantly, but with clarity. His voice wasn't angry. It was honest. And that honesty cracked something. Isaac narrowed his eyes, lips curled in disdain. "You think this little performance will impress anyone?" No one answered. Instead, the manager appeared. A nervous man in a stiff suit, already sweating. "Mr. Thornhill, is there a problem?" "Yes, there's a problem," Isaac snapped. "Your waitress is overstepping, and now this entire place is treating me like the villain." The manager turned to Amara. "Perhaps you should—" "She's not the problem," said a woman from table 7. Heads turned. "She's the reason this child even smiled tonight," the woman continued. "And if you fire her for doing the right thing, I'll take my business elsewhere. So will others." Murmurs of agreement rippled across the room. Diners nodded, some even recording the scene quietly on their phones. In this era, no humiliation happened without an audience, and Isaac was finally realizing he was being seen in a light he couldn't control. Amara stood straighter. "Sir," she said, addressing the manager, "I've done nothing wrong. I've shown respect to every guest, including Mr. Thornhill and his son." The boy stepped closer to her. His small hand reached out again, holding hers now, not in desperation, but in solidarity. "I want to leave," the boy whispered. Isaac's face darkened. "You don't get to decide." But the assistant, quiet until now, interrupted him. "Actually, sir, I think he should." Isaac turned, furious. "Excuse me?" "He's not merchandise. He's not a prop," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "He's your son, and he just asked to leave. That's not disrespect. That's a cry for space you've never given him." A beat passed. Then Isaac stood, slowly, with the weight of a man realizing the room no longer bowed to his presence. He looked at Amara, then at the boy. "You'll regret this." But even that threat sounded empty, because the boy had already chosen. He walked away, not toward the exit, but toward the kitchen, toward Luis, toward the people who had protected his spirit more than his father ever did. And Amara, she followed him, no longer a server. Now she was a shield. The story didn't end in that restaurant. It began there. Within hours, someone's recording of the confrontation made its way to the internet. It started on a small Twitter account. Then someone clipped the boy's line, "She's the only one here who talks to me like I'm human," and posted it with the caption, "This billionaire belittled his own son and got humbled by a waitress. Watch until the end." It spread like wildfire. By morning, the video had over 2 million views. By noon, it was trending. Comment sections erupted. People didn't just share it, they analyzed every frame. The body language, the tone, the way Isaac had said, "you people," The way Amara had stood tall, the way the boy had reached out. Strangers online turned them into symbols: the oppressor, the witness, the resistor, the innocent. Amara didn't have social media. She didn't even know the video existed until Luis showed her his phone at work. "That's us," she whispered, staring at the grainy footage of herself and the boy. "You broke the algorithm," he grinned, "and maybe a few racist egos while you were at it." Her manager, pale and anxious, called her into the office minutes later. "We're under pressure," he stammered. "Corporate wants to make a statement. Mr. Thornhill is threatening legal action." Amara folded her arms. "For what? Being recorded humiliating a child and insulting staff?" "I'm not saying you did anything wrong," he said, eyes darting to the door, "but we need to be careful." "I was careful," she replied calmly. "He wasn't." When she left the office, staff clapped for her. It wasn't loud, it wasn't performative, but it was real. Even the head chef, who barely said a word to anyone, gave her a quiet nod of respect. Meanwhile, Isaac Thornhill's empire began to crack. He tried to dismiss the video as an edited smear campaign. He blamed cancel culture. But then a former employee came forward, then another. Stories of verbal abuse, of racist jokes behind closed doors, of silencing people who spoke up. What once was whispered in private was now shouted publicly. His investors panicked. His board released a statement. "We are aware of the behavior displayed by Mr. Thornhill and are conducting an internal review." And his son? For the first time in his young life, he wasn't trapped behind his father's shadow. A journalist tracked Amara down for an interview. She declined politely. "I didn't do it for attention," she said. "I did it because that boy deserved better." But the world wasn't done listening. People sent letters to the restaurant praising her bravery. A children's advocacy group offered her a role as a speaker. A local news anchor called her the quiet storm that humbled a giant. And through it all, Amara stayed grounded. She kept working, kept smiling, kept showing up. Not because she had to, but because that's who she was. Not a hero, not a headline. Just a woman who refused to look away when cruelty dressed in power. Weeks passed. The buzz died down, but the impact remained. Amara's life didn't change overnight. There were no movie deals, no flashing cameras waiting outside her apartment. But something inside her had shifted. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen. Not as a token, not as a problem, as a person. She still served tables. She still brewed coffee and cleared plates. But people spoke to her differently now. With warmth, with respect, and sometimes with quiet gratitude, as if her strength reminded them of their own. One rainy afternoon, as the lunch rush slowed, Amara noticed a boy at the entrance. It was him. Same curly hair, same shy eyes, but this time he wasn't hiding behind a father. He walked in alone, escorted by a woman, likely a court-appointed guardian. The moment he saw Amara, he smiled. Not the small, polite kind children give when coached. A real smile, one that bloomed from safety. She approached, heart pounding. "You came back," she said gently. He nodded, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. Amara opened it. Inside was a drawing, hand-drawn with pencil and crayon. It was a picture of her and him, standing together, with a caption scribbled in uneven letters. "Thank you for hearing me." Her throat tightened. The guardian stepped forward. "He's been working with counselors. He's starting to talk more. He asked to come here today. To see you." Amara knelt beside him. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. The boy leaned in and hugged her. No cameras, no applause. Just two people who had survived something no child or woman should have had to endure. Across the city, Isaac Thornhill faced consequences his money couldn't shield him from. His board forced him to resign. Several partnerships dissolved overnight. His name, once synonymous with influence, now conjured shame in headlines. He tried to spin the narrative, claimed he was misunderstood, a product of a different time. But no one was listening. Not anymore. Because the world had changed. Not because of one video, but because, for a fleeting moment, decency had gone viral. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Amar stepped outside the restaurant and looked up. The air smelled like fresh rain. The street buzzed with ordinary life, horns honking, laughter spilling from diners, footsteps tapping on wet pavement. She smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because she had refused to be silent, because she had listened when no one else did, and because sometimes the loudest victories are the quiet ones, the ones where a child learns his voice matters, and a woman discovers that standing her ground was worth every second. In the end, Isaac Thornhill had built empires. But Amara, she built something stronger. She built a moment that couldn't be erased, a truth that echoed longer than arrogance ever could. And somewhere deep in that boy's future, perhaps decades from now, he would tell this story. Not as a victim, not as a pawn, but as the boy who was finally heard.